A woman discovered her dog wasn't just a companion, but a hero who changed everything. This is the true and moving story of a woman whose four-legged guardian angel literally saved her life when she least expected it. If you believe in the power of unconditional loyalty, get ready to be moved. The spring breeze carried the scent of oak blossoms when Mary first noticed something was different about Zeus, her 3-year-old German shepherd. Dusk gently settled over the residential neighborhood where they lived, and she watched from the porch as the dog kept a strange vigil, his eyes fixed on something invisible on the horizon. Mary was a visual artist, a 32-year-old woman who carried the weight of profound deafness since childhood, but who had transformed silence into her greatest creative strength. Zeus wasn't just a certified guide dog, he was an extension of her senses, the bridge between her and a world of sounds she would never know. That particular afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in orange hues, she felt through the leash that peculiar vibration that indicated unease. The animal sniffed the air with an intensity she rarely witnessed, as if the wind itself carried warning messages that only he could decipher. Mary's life followed a comfortable routine until that moment. Her mornings started early, with Zeus gently waking her with his wet nose on her hand, a ritual that replaced any alarm clock. Breakfast was shared in silence, but a silence full of communication through glances and touches. She prepared her canvases in the makeshift studio in the garage, where natural light generously entered through the large windows. Zeus was always nearby, lying in his favorite corner, but with his eyes always attentive. It was a partnership, forged in years of training and coexistence, where every gesture had meaning, every movement was an unspoken word. The dog knew the manual signs Mary used, responded to the specific touch on the shoulder that meant danger, to the gesture that indicated time to stop or proceed. But that spring afternoon, Zeus was communicating something new, something she didn't yet fully understand. The decision to enroll in the specialization program at the Academy of Fine Arts had been made after months of hesitation. Mary knew it would be not only an artistic but also a social challenge. Her art had gained local recognition. Her exhibitions attracted more and more visitors, but she felt she needed to take the next step. The Academy represented prestige, connections, opportunities that could transform her hobby into a sustainable career. The application process was complex, especially when it came to special accommodations. She had to explain about Zeus, attach all the guide dog certification documentation, letters of recommendation from her trainer. The response came with a caveat that already planted seeds of concern. Zeus would be allowed on a trial basis, subject to constant behavioral evaluation. It was as if the basic right to have her service dog was a privilege granted reluctantly. The first day at the academy arrived with the heat of early summer. Mary wore her best outfit, prepared her bag with her communication tablet, quick notebook, art supplies. Zeus received an extra brushing, his identification tag shone in the sun. As they entered the imposing neoclassical building, she felt the eyes turn to them. Some curious, others clearly uncomfortable. The receptionist, an elderly woman with glasses and a severe expression, examined Zeus's documents as if looking for a flaw. Mary read on her lips the words protocol and exception. The main classroom was on the second floor, a spacious area with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. The professor, Robert Miller, was a man in his 40s, known for his abstract sculptures and meticulous temperament. He greeted Mary with a polite nod, but his eyes lingered on Zeus with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. The first few weeks passed in veiled tension. Mary excelled in the practical classes, her sharp visual perception compensating for the absence of hearing. She captured nuances of light and shadow that other students missed. Her compositions had an emotional depth that attracted attention. Zeus always remained by her side, lying discreetly, only his eyes moving to follow. The movement in the room. It was during a live model class that the first significant incident occurred. The dog suddenly stood up, barking with an urgency that Mary felt through the vibrations in the floor. He pulled the leash forcefully, dragging her away from the easel. Seconds later, One of the old ceiling lights came loose, falling exactly where she had been. The bang was felt by Mary as a shockwave through the wooden floor. The class panicked, but what she saw on the faces around her was not just fright, but a silent accusation directed at Zeus, as if his barking had caused the accident. The program director, Dr. Helen Garcia, summoned Mary to a meeting the next day. The director's office was an intimidating space with walls covered in diplomas and awards. Mary read on the director's lips words like distraction, safety of other students, inappropriate behavior. The director's hands gestured as she spoke, and Mary realized she avoided direct eye contact. The message was clear. Zeus was under observation. Any other incident would result in his ban from the campus. Mary left the meeting with a heavy heart, the familiar feeling of rejection resurfacing from old memories. How many times in her life had she been seen as a problem, a complication, someone who demanded too much? Zeus felt her anguish, pressing his body against her legs in a gesture of comfort that almost made her cry right there in the hallway. It was around this time that Mary met Lucas, one of the students in the sculpture program. He approached her during a break, not with pity or morbid curiosity, but with genuine interest in her work. Lucas had artist's hands, calloused from working with stone and metal, and a smile that lit up his brown eyes. He communicated with Mary. By writing in her notebook, he had learned some basic sign language on his own. The first act of kindness came when he helped her carry her heavy canvases to the car, without her having to ask. There was no rush in his movements, just a naturalness that made her let her guard down for the first time in a long time. Zeus, always wary of strangers, accepted Lucas with surprising tranquility, even allowing him to pet his head. Summer advanced, bringing oppressive heat that made the air shimmer over the asphalt. Mary noticed that Zeus was increasingly restless during classes. He constantly sniffed the air. His ears moved, picking up sounds she would never hear. In certain areas of the building, especially near the structural walls, the dog showed visible agitation. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to the heat, the new environment, but deep down she knew that Zeus never acted without reason. On a particularly sweltering afternoon, while working with clay in the sculpture room, Zeus began to growl low, a sound that Mary felt more than heard, the subtle vibrations coming through the leash. Lucas, who was working at the bench next to her, noticed the dog's behavior. He approached and gently touched Mary's shoulder, pointing to an almost imperceptible crack in the wall. It was just a thin line, but Zeus was fixated on it as if he could see through the concrete. The second time Lucas showed his growing closeness to Mary was during a visit to the city museum. The whole class went to study the classical works, and Lucas naturally stayed by her side, describing with gestures and quick drawings what she couldn't grasp from the guide's explanations. There was a patience in his gestures, a willingness to make the experience complete for her without making it an act of charity. When they stopped in front of a particularly emotive sculpture, a female figure in marble that seemed to emerge from the raw stone, Lucas wrote in his notebook that the work reminded him of her work, the ability to find beauty where others saw only silence. Mary felt the heat rise to her cheeks, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a long time. Zeus, always attentive to his owner's emotions, rested his nose on her hand in a gesture of approval. Autumn arrived, painting the campus trees in shades of rust and gold. With it came an escalation in the restrictions imposed on Zeus. Director Garcia implemented new rules. The dog could no longer enter the library, the cafeteria, or any area considered a common gathering place. Mary found herself having to leave Zeus outside during important lectures, tied to a post like a common animal. Not the trained professional he was. The humiliation burned, but what hurt her most was seeing the confusion in Zeus's eyes, his growing anxiety every time they were separated. She started missing some classes, preferring to work at home where she could have Zeus by her side without judgment. It was Lucas who sought her out on one of those afternoons, appearing at her door with a worried expression and a vase of sunflowers in his hands. The revealing conversation took place in Mary's garden, where she cultivated her own. flowers as inspiration for her paintings. Lucas wrote at length about his own struggles. As the son of immigrants who faced subtle and not-so-subtle prejudices during his upbringing, he understood the weight of being seen as different, as someone who didn't quite fit the expected mold. Mary shared her childhood memories, the accident that caused her deafness, the years of therapy and adaptation, the discovery of art as her voice. Zeus remained between them, his presence a constant comfort. As the sun began to set, dyeing the sky purple and pink, Lucas took Mary's hand for the first time. It was a gentle, hesitant touch, but full of promise. She didn't need to hear words to understand what that gesture meant. The strange events at the academy intensified with the arrival of late autumn. Other students began to report strange sounds coming from the walls, a musty smell that appeared and disappeared. Maintenance was called several times, but they always concluded that it was just the old building adjusting to temperature changes. Mary noticed that Zeus became particularly agitated near the east wing of the building, where the main studios were located. On a cold October morning, she was working on a large canvas when Zeus suddenly grabbed the waistband of her pants with his teeth pulling with a force that made her drop the brush. He dragged her into the hallway just as a piece of plaster from the ceiling collapsed onto her workstation. The gypsum dust floated in the air like artificial snow, and Mary saw the dark hole that opened in the ceiling, revealing rotten wooden beams. This time, they couldn't blame Zeus for causing the accident. It was clear that he had saved Mary from serious, possibly fatal injury. Even so, Director Garcia insisted that the dog's erratic behavior was a dangerous distraction. The ultimatum came in writing. Zeus was forbidden from entering the main building. Mary could continue her classes, but she would have to leave her dog outside or at home. It was an impossible choice, like asking someone to choose between breathing and seeing. Mary felt the world narrow around her. The walls of the academy, that once represented opportunity, now seemed like a prison. It was in this moment of despair that Lucas came up with an unexpected proposal. He had researched extensively on service animal rights, found legal precedents, similar cases that had been resolved in favor of people with disabilities. More than that, he had noticed something that had escaped others: the pattern in the incidents. They all happened in specific areas of the building, always involving the old structure. Lucas had a cousin who was an engineer and wanted his opinion on what might be happening. Mary saw in him not only a romantic interest, but a true ally, someone willing to fight by her side. The demonstration of mutual vulnerability came when Lucas confessed that he had fallen in love with her from the first day, but had been afraid to approach, insecure about how to court someone so strong and independent. Mary responded by showing her most intimate notebooks, where she had drawn his face dozens of times, capturing every angle, every expression. Winter arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. Mary continued attending classes, but now with the support not only of Lucas, but also of other colleagues who began to question the fairness of the restrictions imposed. A small support network formed, students who took turns staying with Zeus outside, ensuring he wasn't alone in the cold. The dog, in turn, kept a constant vigil, his eyes always turned towards the building as if he could see through the walls what was happening to Mary. It was during the preparations for the annual winter exhibition that the situation reached its dramatic climax. It was the most important event of the academic year, when students' works would be exhibited to critics, collectors, and the general public. On the eve of the exhibition, a winter storm was approaching. Mary was making the final adjustments to her installation, a series of canvases exploring the theme of visual sound, when Zeus, who was tied up outside according to the rules, began to bark frantically. The sound reached her through the vibrations in the floor, an urgent pattern that she recognized as a maximum danger signal. She ran outside and found Zeus trying to break free from the leash, his whole body tense with urgency. Without hesitation, Mary untied him and was immediately dragged back inside the building. Zeus led her directly to the basement, a rarely used area where old equipment was stored. There, the dog began to scratch frantically at a specific section of the wall. Lucas appeared minutes later, having seen the commotion outside. Together, they examined the area Zeus indicated. At first, it seemed like just another old, dusty wall, but Lucas noticed that there was abnormal moisture, and when he pressed the surface, small pieces of concrete came loose. He immediately called his engineer cousin, who, even though it was late at night, agreed to come. While they waited, Mary hugged Zeus, feeling his heart beating fast against her chest. The dog was trembling, not from cold, but from tension, as if every fiber of his being was focused on communicating the imminent danger. The engineer arrived. With measuring equipment, and what he discovered was alarming. The building's support structure was severely compromised. Years of undetected infiltration had corroded the reinforcement bars of the reinforced concrete. The main beams were at the limit of their load-bearing capacity. The most frightening thing was that the large exhibition hall was located exactly above the most compromised area. With hundreds of people expected for the next day's event, it would be a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions if the structure gave way. The engineer declared that the building needed to be evacuated and closed immediately. The morning of the exhibition dawned with the chaos of the discovery. Emergency teams isolated the building. Structural engineers were called for a complete assessment. Director Garcia was in shock, alternating between disbelief and horror as she realized how close they had been to a tragedy. When the extent of the problem was revealed, with deep cracks found at multiple points in the structure, it became clear that Zeus had detected the danger months before it became critical. His barking, his agitation, his erratic behavior, all had been attempts to warn of the growing danger. Mary stood in the parking lot, watching the building that almost became her tomb, when she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was the director, with tears in her eyes, gesturing an apology that didn't need words. The exhibition was rescheduled for an alternative location and became an even bigger event due to the media coverage of the hero dog that saved hundreds of lives. Mary found herself in the spotlight not as the disabled artist who needed special accommodations, but as the woman whose partnership with her dog had prevented a tragedy. Her works, which explored the visualization of sound and communication beyond words, gained new meaning in light of the events. Critics who might have previously seen her work as niche now understood the depth of her unique perception of the world. Zeus became a local celebrity, but maintained his professional dignity, always by Mary's side, always vigilant. The act of sacrifice that solidified the relationship between Mary and Lucas came unexpectedly. During the reorganized exhibition, an important collector expressed interest in acquiring Mary's entire series, but with one condition. He wanted her to move to Hope to work exclusively for his gallery. It was a unique opportunity, the kind of offer that emerging artists dream of receiving. Mary was torn, knowing it would mean leaving behind the life she had built, the house with the garden where Zeus ran free, and above all, leaving Lucas. It was he who surprised her by revealing that he had received a similar offer from a studio in Hope weeks before, but had refused because he didn't want to be away from her. Now, he proposed that they go together, build a new life where they could both grow as artists and as a couple. Spring returned, bringing with it a new chapter. Mary and Lucas had settled in Hope, sharing a spacious loft with an outdoor area for Zeus. The Academy of Fine Arts not only publicly apologized, but also created an exemplary protocol for the inclusion of service animals, named the Zeus Protocol, in honor of the dog who saved the institution from a tragedy and a devastating lawsuit. Mary became an active voice in the disability artist community, using her experience to open doors that had been closed by prejudice and ignorance. Her exhibitions now included special tours in sign language and tactile descriptions of the works, making art accessible in ways she herself would have liked to have experienced. Zeus, now with a few white hairs decorating his muzzle, maintained the same dedication as always. Every morning he woke Mary with the same gentle ritual. Every day was a renewal of the silent vow between them. Lucas had become fluent in sign language, and the three of them's conversations flowed in a dance of gestures, touches, and glances that dispensed with spoken words. The studio they shared was a space of joint creation, where sculptures and paintings dialogued, where Mary's silence found voice in the form she created, where love had built its own language. On a special afternoon, exactly 6 months after the incident at the Academy, Mary was finishing a new work. It was an immersive installation that combined visual and tactile elements to tell the story of a silent guardian. Zeus was lying in his usual place, watching her work with the same attention as always. Lucas entered the studio carrying 3 cups of tea, a daily ritual of theirs, and stopped to admire the finished work. The work showed a stylized dog, with lines that transformed into visible sound waves, surrounded by fragments of wall that disintegrated and reconstructed, symbolizing how destruction can lead to renewal. Mary touched Zeus's soft fur, feeling his calm breath under her hand. How many times had he been her voice when she had no words? How many times had he been her ears when the world tried to catch her off guard? The dog raised his head and licked her hand, a simple gesture that carried years of companionship. Lucas approached and enveloped both of them in a hug, and at that moment, Mary felt the completeness of having found not only her artistic voice, but her family. The silence that surrounded her was no longer a barrier, but a sacred space where love communicated in frequencies that transcended sound. The journey that began with rejection and misunderstanding had transformed into a story of overcoming that inspired others. Mary received daily messages from people who found courage in her story, parents of deaf children who saw in her an example that limitations exist only in the minds of those who impose them. Zeus had become a symbol not only of service, but of how animal intuition can overcome human arrogance. The Academy, completely renovated and restructured, invited Mary to be a guest speaker, an honor she accepted on the condition that Zeus be by her side on stage. What had begun as a quest for artistic perfection had transformed into a journey of personal discovery and collective transformation. Mary had learned that her deafness was not a disability to be overcome, but a unique perspective that enriched her art and her life. Lucas had proven that true love communicates in all languages, always finding a way to express itself. And Zeus, the silent guardian, had shown that heroism doesn't need fanfare, that saving lives can be as simple as trusting instinct and as profound as unconditional loyalty. As the sun set over hope, painting the sky with the same colors that decorated Mary's canvases, she reflected on how life had conspired to bring 3 souls together in an improbable dance. Every obstacle faced had been a step towards something greater. Every rejection had paved the way for deeper acceptance. The Academy's prejudice had transformed into an inclusion policy. The fear of opening up to love had blossomed into a creative and romantic partnership. And the dog that some saw as a distraction had proven to be the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. Mary knew that other battles would come. The world still had much to learn about true inclusion, about seeing beyond appearances and trusting what cannot be immediately understood. But she was no longer alone. She had Lucas by her side, partner in art and life. She had Zeus, whose unconditional love was a daily reminder that the deepest bonds transcend words. And she had her art, her visual voice that now echoed in galleries and hearts, proving that silence can be the most eloquent of languages. The story of Mary, Lucas, and Zeus became a modern urban legend, shared in conversations and social networks, inspiring documentaries and news articles. But at the center of all the attention remained 3 beings who had learned the simplest and deepest truth, that love, whether between humans or between species, always finds a way to manifest itself. That the true disability lies in the inability to see the potential in every being, and that sometimes guardian angels come with 4 paws, a wagging tail, and the instinctive wisdom to protect those they love. And you, at what point will you allow trust in the improbable to transform your desert into a flourishing garden?